Phyllis Knox was wiping the counter at 4 p.m. when the air changed.
Not a sound.
A feeling.
Cold. Wrong.
She looked up. Ro Duk-young. Pressed black suit. Dragon tattoo crawling up his neck. 2 enforcers behind him. Still, professional, practiced. He moved to the counter without rushing, because men like him never rush, and leaned in close enough that she could see the scar on his cheek. Then he spoke in Jejueo. Not Korean, Jejueo. A dying dialect spoken by a handful of elderly islanders. He used it like a blade, and his smirk said he already knew where it would land. Phyllis set her cloth down, and what she said next made one enforcer step back, made the other's face go blank, and made Duk-young's smirk dissolve like it had never existed at all. Now, look. You gotta understand something before this story goes any further. Phyllis Knox wasn't just some shopkeeper.
She chose this.
The apron. The cramped little store with the creaky floorboards and the hand-lettered price tags. The obscurity. She built it like a fortress, one unremarkable day at a time, because 3 years ago, someone very powerful had taken everything she'd worked for, her career, her credibility, her name, and torched it with fabricated evidence so clean, so convincing, that not even the people who loved her believed her. So, yeah, she disappeared, went quiet, kept her head down behind this counter, in this neighborhood, in this shop that smelled like sesame oil and survival. This was her sanctuary, and no one was supposed to notice her here. But the neighborhood was changing, and the man responsible for that change had just walked through her front door looking for an easy humiliation. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the very scandal currently eating Duk-young alive on every news channel, the planted evidence dismantling his reputation piece by piece, the betrayal crawling through his own syndicate. It had the same fingerprints as the lie that destroyed Phyllis. She'd recognized the pattern months ago, and she'd been waiting, patiently, quietly, from behind this wooden counter, for the right piece to fall into place. Duk-young, in all his arrogance, had just walked in and handed himself to her. He thought he came to trap her. He had no idea he'd just become her most important move. You scrolled past 100 videos today. You stopped for this one. Maybe that's not an accident. If Phyllis's story hits different, if you've ever been underestimated, written off, or counted out by someone who should have known better, then you already know this story isn't just fiction. Don't let this be the one you watched halfway and forgot. Hit subscribe, because the rest of the story, it will not disappoint you. Phyllis Knox had a system. 6 a.m. Unlock the front door, flip the sign, start the coffee. 6:15. Restock the bottom shelf near the window, the one that always ran low on dried anchovies and sesame crackers. 7 a.m. Greet Mrs. Park from across the street, who came in every single morning for banana milk and never once bought anything else.
8 a.m. inventory.
9 a.m. Wipe down every surface until the whole store smelled like lemon and order. Routine. That was the whole point. Routine meant invisible. Invisible meant safe. The shop itself wasn't much to look at. Cramped aisles, wooden shelves that leaned slightly to the left, a cash register old enough to have its own personality. Hand-lettered price tags. A single overhead light that buzzed faintly when the weather changed. But Phyllis had made it hers. She knew where every single item lived. She knew which floorboard creaked, third one from the door, slight left, and she knew the exact weight of silence that settled over the shop at 2 p.m. when foot traffic died and the neighborhood exhaled. She liked that silence. She'd built that silence. 3 years ago, Phyllis Knox had a different life. A real one, the kind with a name attached to it, a career, a reputation people respected. She'd spent a decade building credibility in spaces that weren't built for her, fighting her way into rooms that kept their doors locked, and she was good.
No capítulo.
She was genuinely, undeniably good at what she did. And then, overnight, someone decided that was a problem. The evidence came out of nowhere. documents, screenshots, a paper trail so clean and so perfectly damning that even her closest allies went quiet. People she'd known for years stopped returning calls. Her name became a punchline, and the people who built the lie, they sat back and watched it burn. She never found out who, exactly. Not then. So she disappeared, traded her old life for an apron and a lease on a tired little grocery store in a neighborhood where nobody asked too many questions. She learned Korean, properly learned it, not just conversationally, but deep. Regional dialects, historical syntax, the kind of linguistic archaeology most people don't even know exists. It gave her something to do with the anger, channeled it into something quiet and sharp and useful. The shop became her cover. But it also became, and she'd never say this out loud, something close to home. She was good here, steady, and she intended to stay that way. Roh Duk-young, on the other hand, was having the worst week of his entire criminal career. And listen, for a man in his line of work, that was really saying something. It started with the media. One outlet dropped a story, some investigative piece with documents, financials, photographs, painting Duk-young as the architect of a neighborhood extortion ring that had been bleeding local businesses for years. Which, okay, technically wasn't entirely false. But the specific evidence they had, the dates, the names, the paper trail pointing directly at him and nobody else, that was planted. He knew it the second he saw it. Somebody had gone to a lot of trouble to make sure every piece pointed at him like an arrow, clean and deliberate, with zero fingerprints from anyone else in the syndicate. Within 48 hours, it was everywhere. Every outlet, every platform, every comment section. The court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict, and it wasn't looking good for Roh Duk-young. His business partners started going quiet. 2 restaurants that had been under his protection for years suddenly, mysteriously, stopped answering his calls. His own enforcers were getting nervous. He could feel it in the way they stood, the way they didn't quite meet his eyes anymore.
And the deadline. God, the deadline.
There was a meeting scheduled, the kind of meeting you don't miss, with the kind of people you don't stand up in 5 days. And Duk-young was supposed to walk into that room still carrying the weight of his reputation. He was supposed to walk in as the Duk-young, the man, the authority, the guy nobody messed with. Right now, he looked like a man the media was actively dismantling in real time. He needed a win. Didn't matter what kind. He just needed to feel like himself again, like someone who walked into a room and owned it without trying. He needed to remind himself and everybody watching that he was still the predator in this neighborhood, not the prey. That's how he ended up at Phyllis Knox's little grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 enforcers at his back and that particular expression on his face, the one that said he'd already decided how this was going to go. The bell above the door rang. Phyllis heard it without looking up. 3rd customer of the afternoon. She was restocking the middle shelf, bags of roasted seaweed, price tagged in her own handwriting, and she took her time turning around, because that was part of it. That was the whole performance of ordinary. Nothing to see here.
Just a woman doing her job.
She turned around, and her hands kept moving, even as every single alarm in her body went absolutely silent and still. She recognized him immediately. Roh Duk-young wasn't exactly a low-profile figure in this neighborhood, or in any room he walked into. The black suit, the undercut, the dragon tattoo climbing his neck like it was looking for somewhere to go. And the expression, that look like he was already bored by what was about to happen to you. He moved toward the counter slowly, his 2 men spreading slightly behind him like punctuation. One near the door, one just behind his right shoulder. She clocked them both in a single glance and filed them away. Duk-young reached the counter, leaned over it, way too far into her space, deliberate and practiced. He was looking at her the way certain kinds of men look at things they've already decided don't matter. Phyllis set her hands flat on the wooden surface and waited. And then he spoke. Not in Korean. Not the Korean you'd hear on the streets or in the restaurants of this neighborhood. He went deep, pulled out something old and obscure and regional, a dialect from Jeju Island off the southern coast of Korea that most Korean nationals have never even heard spoken aloud. Jejueo, a language UNESCO has flagged as critically endangered, with fewer than 10,000 fluent speakers remaining, most of them elderly, most of them on that island. A linguistic artifact, a dead language walking. He used it like a trap. The words he chose were ugly, a threat wrapped in syllables he was certain she couldn't parse, designed to make her stand there looking confused and small while he smiled. Here's what he didn't know. Phyllis had spent the better part of 18 months studying Jejueo specifically. Not for any practical reason most people would understand. She'd found an elderly speaker through an online linguistics archive, paid for remote lessons, filled 3 notebooks with grammar notes. She'd done it because dead languages hold secrets. Because if you want to understand how power moves through a culture, you start with what that culture tried to bury. She let him finish. She set her cloth down, slowly,
No rules.
looked him dead in the eye. And in the exact same dialect, same cadence, same register, cleaner grammar, she said, "You conjugated that wrong. And you're blocking my aisle." The shop went still like someone had cut the sound. One enforcer stepped back. The other one actually blinked, like his brain was buffering, trying to reload. Dakyung's jaw dropped in slow motion, that practiced smirk sliding straight off his face. Because here's the thing about a man who weaponizes language. He's never once considered the possibility that the weapon could be taken from him mid-swing. He stood there, speechless. For 4 full seconds, Ro Duck-young, head of a criminal syndicate, man who made grown men nervous just by walking into a room, had absolutely nothing to say. Phyllis tilted her head slightly, just enough to be polite about it. "Was there something you needed? Or are you just here for the banana milk?" He left. Didn't say another word. Straightened his jacket, looked at his enforcers, who were very carefully looking at the floor, and walked out. The bell above the door rang again. And then it was quiet. Phyllis went back to restocking the seaweed shelf. But her hands, just for a second, weren't entirely steady. By Thursday, Duck-young's situation had gone from bad to ugly. A second media outlet ran a follow-up, this one with video. Surveillance footage, supposedly, of a cash exchange with a local councilman. The footage was grainy enough to be plausible, clear enough to be damaging. By noon it had 600,000 views. By evening, a city official was calling for a formal investigation. Duck-young's legal team was making calls. His PR contact, the one legitimate one he kept on payroll for exactly these situations, sent him a 2-word text, "I'm sorry." And then one of his own lieutenants, a man named Juan, someone Duck-young had trusted for 7 years, didn't show up to their scheduled check-in, didn't call, didn't send word, just vanished. Duck-young sat in the back of his car outside a restaurant he used to own the room in and stared at his phone. The pieces were arranging themselves in front of him, and he did not like what they were spelling out. The evidence was too clean. The timing was too precise. The media drops were coordinated, each one landing just far enough apart to sustain the news cycle without giving him time to respond. Someone had planned this. Not a rival from outside the syndicate, a rival from inside it. Someone who knew exactly where to look for documentation, exactly which contacts to brief, exactly how to build a story that would be believed. His own people had set him up. He thought about the meeting in 2 days, the one he was supposed to walk into as the man in power. And he understood, for the first time, with cold and absolute clarity, that meeting wasn't for him to demonstrate his authority. It was for them to formalize his removal. He'd been played. Completely, meticulously, professionally played. He made 3 calls. All 3 went to voicemail. He opened his door, stepped out into the night air, and stood there for a long moment with his hands in his pockets, the city moving around him like it didn't notice his entire world was collapsing. Who, he kept thinking, who had the patience for this? By Friday morning, they came for him. Not metaphorically. Not through the media or the legal system or a carefully worded betrayal. 2 cars for men, a parking garage 3 blocks from his apartment. Professional. Efficient. The kind of thing you organize when you're not just trying to ruin someone, you're trying to eliminate them. He got away.
Barely.
One enforcer, the quiet one, the loyal one, a young guy named Suk who'd been with him for 2 years, pulled him out of the first car and moved fast through an alley while the other 2 held position long enough to buy them 30 seconds. 30 seconds is not a lot. Duk-young ran. Ro Duk-young, in his tailored black suit, silver rings and all, ran through the back alleys of a neighborhood he used to control. His phone was in the car. His car was surrounded. His apartment was compromised. Every associate he could think of was either gone, silent, or actively working against him. He needed somewhere to go. Somewhere his enemies wouldn't look. Somewhere so far outside his world that the logic of it would break their model. He stopped at the mouth of an alley, breathing hard, and looked up at the street sign. He knew exactly where he was. He stood there for a long moment, pride doing that thing it does right before it loses, making one last argument, and then he pushed it down, straightened his jacket out of pure habit, and walked toward a little grocery store with a hand-lettered sign and a bell above the door that rang when you walked in. Phyllis looked up when the bell rang. She saw Duk-young in the doorway, and her expression didn't change. Not surprise. Not satisfaction. Just that steady, quiet look that had completely dismantled him 3 days ago. He was roughed up, jacket torn at the shoulder, a cut above his eyebrow, drying dark. He was breathing control, trying to anyway, and his eyes were doing that fast, tactical scan of the room that told her everything she needed to know about what had just happened to him. He stood there in her doorway. The man who'd come in here 4 days ago to humiliate her, who'd leaned over her counter with that practiced smirk and a trap built from a dead language. He started. And stopped. Like the words genuinely weren't there. Phyllis looked at him for a moment. Then she reached under the counter, produced a clean cloth, and set it on the surface between them. "Third aisle," she said. "There's a stool near the back. Sit down before you fall down." He blinked. She turned back to the shelf she'd been restocking. "And lock the door behind you." He locked the door. He found the stool. He sat. And Ro Duk-young, the predator, the syndicate boss, the man with the dragon tattoo and the weaponized language, sat in the narrow back corner of a tiny grocery store, holding a cloth to his eyebrow, while the woman he'd tried to humiliate moved quietly through her shop like nothing unusual was happening at all. The store smelled like sesame oil and dried seaweed and something faintly like coffee. He looked around at the hand-lettered price tags, the slightly leaning shelves, the old register, and despite everything, despite the burning cut above his eye and the destroyed phone and the 2 cars full of men who wanted him dead, he felt something unexpected settle over him in that cramped, quiet space. He didn't have a word for it, but it felt, strangely, like the first safe thing he'd touched in days. Phyllis came around the corner with a small first aid kit and set it on the shelf beside him, without making eye contact. "You gonna tell me what happened?" she said. He looked at her. "Why would I tell you anything?" She shrugged, already walking back toward the counter. "You don't have to, but you're in my shop, and I already know more about what's happening to you than you think I do." He went still. She glanced back over her shoulder. That steady, knowing look, calm as still water, completely unafraid. "So," she said, "whenever you're ready." He talked first, which surprised him. Maybe it was the shop, the weird, quiet stillness of it. The way Phyllis moved around the space without any urgency, restocking, straightening, doing ordinary things while his entire life was on fire 3 blocks away. There was something about her calm that made the silence feel less like emptiness and more like room. Room to think. Room to speak without it being used against you immediately. He started small. Told her about Juan going missing, about the media drops and how precisely timed they were. about the meeting he was supposed to walk into as the man in charge, and now understood was a trap dressed up as a formality. Phyllis listened, didn't interrupt, didn't react much, just kept her hands moving through small, quiet tasks while he talked. The evidence, he said finally. It's real documentation, real financials. But the framing, someone curated it, pulled specific transactions, and left everything else out, like they knew exactly where to look and what to leave behind. That was all she said, just like she was filing something away. He looked at her. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. He waited. She set down the jar she'd been shelving and turned to face him for the first time since he'd sat down. Crossed her arms. Studied him with that level, unreadable gaze. 3 years ago, she said, someone built a paper trail on me.
Clean.
Specific. Designed to look like I'd been doing something I wasn't. Every piece pointed at me, and only me. The people who could have defended me went quiet because the evidence looked too good to argue with. Duck Young was still. The documents had a pattern, she continued. A structure. The way they were assembled, what got included, what got deliberately omitted, how the timeline was shaped. I've had 3 years to study that pattern. She paused. Your media drops have the same fingerprints. The store was very quiet. Same people, he said. Not a question. Same people, she confirmed. He leaned back against the shelf behind him and let out a breath that carried 3 days of adrenaline with it. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about being betrayed. The worst part isn't the danger. It's the confusion, the not knowing, the who and the why eating at you while everything burns. And for the first time in 72 hours, Duck Young had an answer. A shape to put on the thing that had been dismantling him. It didn't make him feel better, exactly. But it made him feel like he was standing on solid ground again. Even if that ground happened to be the back corner of a grocery store that smelled like sesame oil. So, what do you want? He said. Because he knew with the instinct of someone who'd spent his life reading people, that Phyllis Knox hadn't survived 3 years in hiding just to offer him kindness. She looked at him steadily. I want them to lose everything, she said. Same way they made us lose everything. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Bet, he said quietly, and meant it. They worked through the night. Phyllis had notebooks, actual physical notebooks, 3 of them, filled with her careful handwriting. Cross-referenced names, dates, transaction patterns, media contacts, corporate shell structures. 3 years of quiet, methodical documentation built from public records, archived news pieces, and the kind of slow forensic patience that most people don't have. Duck Young looked through them and went very still in a way that told her he was genuinely impressed and working hard not to show it. He filled in the gaps she couldn't reach from the outside. Names she had as question marks, he knew. Internal syndicate decisions that never became public record. He'd been in the room for half of them. Piece by piece, the picture assembled itself across the wooden counter between them. A leadership group that had been systematically eliminating anyone, inside the syndicate or out, who posed a threat to their consolidation of power. Duck Young had been the biggest threat of all. Phyllis had simply been in the way. There are 4 of them, Duck Young said, pointing at a name she'd circled. This one's the architect. He's the one with the media contacts. I know, Phyllis said. I just couldn't prove it without someone who'd been inside the room. He looked at her. And now you have someone who was in the room. And now I have someone who was in the room. He almost smiled. Almost. They were still talking at 2 a.m. when the lights in the shop flickered. Phyllis stopped mid-sentence. The lights flickered again, then held. She was already moving, quiet, fast, completely different energy than the woman who'd been calmly shelving seaweed all day. She killed the main overhead light with one switch. The shop dropped into the dim amber glow of the single back lamp. She moved to the window, staying below the sill, and looked out at the street. 2 cars. Parked wrong, too close, too deliberate. Engines off but positioned for fast exit. She counted the shadows. For maybe 5 men.
They found you, she said. Flat.
No panic in it. Dukyung was already on his feet. He scanned the shop, the single entrance, the narrow aisles, the back storage door.
His jaw was tight, eyes sharp.
The enforcer in him had clicked back on. Back exit. Padlocked from outside. Takes 40 seconds to open. We don't have 40 seconds. She was already moving deeper into the store. Stay low. Follow me. Don't touch anything unless I tell you to. He looked at her for exactly 1 second. This woman in her apron, in her grocery store, giving him tactical instructions with the calm of someone who'd run this scenario in her head before. You've done this before, he said. She didn't answer that. She just moved. The front door came in fast. Not a knock. Not a warning. Just the specific, deliberate violence of professionals who aren't interested in conversation. 2 men through the front, moving in the dark with small flashlights sweeping low. 1 more entering from a side window Phyllis had clocked before they did. Here's what they didn't account for. Phyllis knew every inch of this store in complete darkness. Every shelf position. Every low edge. Every place the floor dipped. She'd lived in this shop for 3 years, restocked it 10,000 times, walked it in the dark when the power went out in winter. This was her space. And in the dark, that was everything. She moved through the back aisle like water, silent and low. Dukyung followed, closer than she expected, quieter than she would have given him credit for. The man had survival instincts. She'd give him that. The first flashlight swept their aisle and found nothing. She took the second man by absolute surprise, came out of the gap between 2 shelves, fast and controlled, using the narrow aisle as leverage. He went down hard against the bottom shelf, a cascade of canned goods going with him. Loud, chaotic, completely intended. The noise pulled the first man toward her right as Dukyung, moving on pure instinct, came out of the dark from the left. It was not elegant. It was not choreographed. It was a grocery store brawl in total darkness between 4 people who all had something serious to lose. And it was loud. Shelves crashing, glass breaking, someone hitting the old wooden floor hard enough to shake the register up front. The third man, the window one, got through the back aisle and had Dukyung by the jacket before Phyllis got there. She saw Dukyung take a hit, bad, to the ribs, heard him grunt, and go down to 1 knee. The man raised something. She didn't give him the chance to use it. She moved fast, and she moved mean, and she moved with the kind of precision that comes from training, not instinct. And when she was done, the third man was on the floor and not getting up anytime soon. Silence. Heavy, jagged silence. Dukyung was on his knees between 2 toppled shelves, 1 hand braced on the floor, breathing in controlled pulls. Ribs, probably. Maybe 1 broken. He looked up at her through the dark, his expression doing something complicated she didn't have a name for. You, he managed between breaths, are not just a shopkeeper. No, she agreed. She reached down and helped him up. He sat on the stool in the back while she called it in, anonymously, clean, the kind of call that gets a response without generating questions she didn't want to answer. They had maybe 15 minutes before the neighborhood got complicated. Dukyung's ribs were bad. He was holding himself carefully, breathing shallow, silver rings catching the single lamplight. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, which admittedly was only a few days, genuinely human. The arrogance had been knocked out of him somewhere between the second aisle and the floor, and what was left was just a man. Tired, hurt, trying to figure out what the next move was. I owe you, he said. Phyllis looked up from the notebook she'd been sliding into her bag. Yeah, she said. You do. He held her gaze. So, what do you want? Name it. She zipped the bag, stood, looked at him with that direct, steady, completely unreadable expression. I need you to walk into that meeting, she said. He blinked. The meeting in 2 days. The one they set up to remove you. I need you to walk in, sit down, and let them think they've won. Let them think you're desperate enough to negotiate. She set her hand on the counter. And I need you to wear a wire. Silence. Duck Young stared at her. You saved my life, he said slowly, so you could use me as bait. I saved your life, she said, because if you die, the testimony dies with you. And without testimony, I've got documents and patterns, but no direct witness. No one who was in the room. No one whose word stands up. She held his gaze without flinching. You're not just bait, Duck Young. You're the only evidence that actually sticks. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, and she hadn't expected this, he laughed. Low, sharp, and real. Not the performative kind. The kind that comes out when something hits you so precisely that you can't do anything else.
This whole time, he said.
You've been running a counter operation. 3 years, she said simply. He looked at her, and in his expression, beneath the pain and the exhaustion and the complicated wreckage of the last 72 hours, there was something that looked a lot like genuine respect. All right, he said.
Bet.
The meeting happened on a Wednesday. The 4 syndicate leaders, the architect and his inner circle, the men who'd built the frame around Duck Young and the lie around Phyllis, sat around a private table in a restaurant they thought was clean. Controlled environment. Their territory. Their rules. Duck Young walked in alone. Jacket pressed, posture straight. Dragon tattoos showing above his open collar. He sat down like a man who'd spent the last 4 days running and hiding and bleeding in a grocery store back room, which is to say, he sat down like a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose and had made his peace with it. Which, it turned out, is the most dangerous way to sit down at any table. They started talking, laying out their terms, their conditions, the polite corporate language of a hostile takeover dressed up as a negotiation. Duck Young listened. Asked the right questions. Let them say exactly what they needed to say, in exactly the words they chose to say it. Every syllable of it went into a recording, and simultaneously, a very organized package. Documents, cross-referenced financials, pattern analysis, corporate shell structures, 3 years of Phyllis Knox's careful handwriting, landed in the inboxes of 7 journalists, 2 federal investigators, and an independent media outlet that had been building a story of its own about syndicate-connected real estate corruption. The restaurant was still full when the first alert hit. By evening, it was everywhere. Not Duck Young this time. The architects. The names behind the names. The men who'd moved the pieces and built the frames and sat comfortably behind layers of insulation while other people took the fall. Their financials, their media contacts, their shell companies, their own voices, recorded and clean, discussing the removal of a syndicate boss they'd set up and a community they'd been extracting from for years. The court of public opinion, which had been so efficiently turned against Duck Young just 1 week earlier, moved with equal speed in the opposite direction. Except this time, the story didn't leak. It broke. All at once, from multiple directions, with documentation so thorough and cross-referenced that there was nowhere to hide and no version of events that worked in their favor. Their reputations didn't fade. They collapsed. And in a quiet little grocery store across town, the kind with a slightly leaning shelf and a register that had its own personality and a bell above the door that rang when you walked in, Phyllis Knox read every single headline, slowly, with a cup of coffee she'd made herself at 6 a.m., same as always. She didn't celebrate loudly. That wasn't her. She just sat with it for a long moment. 3 years of patience, 3 years of invisible, 3 years of building something so careful and so precise in the quiet that nobody saw it coming. Then she got up, tied her apron, and opened the shop. Duck Young came by 2 weeks later.
No enforcers. No tailored suit.
Just him, jeans, a plain jacket, the dragon tattoo visible above the collar. He came in quietly, let the door close behind him, and stood there looking slightly like a man who'd never learned how to just walk into a place without making it a whole thing. Phyllis looked up from the register. "You look better," she said. Ribs are still. He made a gesture that communicated not great. But yeah. He moved to the counter, set something down, a small wrapped package, plain paper, no label. She looked at it, then at him. I don't do gifts, she said. It's not a gift, he said. It's a debt payment. Partial. She picked it up. It was light. She unwrapped it. Inside was a small, very old book, a linguistic text, Jejueo Grammar and Oral History, published in the 1980s, the kind of thing you find in specialty archives. A handwritten note inside the cover in Korean, for the woman who knew what I didn't. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set it on the counter beside the register, right next to her coffee, and didn't say anything, which Duck Young was beginning to understand, was Phyllis for thank you. So what now, he said. She looked up. Now, she said, you go figure out who you want to be when you're not hiding behind a reputation that was never going to protect you anyway. He was quiet.
And you, he said.
She glanced around her shop. The slightly leaning shelves, the hand-lettered price tags, the old register. Mrs. Park would be in at 7 for her banana milk. The third floorboard still creaked. I've got a shop to run, she said. And she went back to work. Here's what this story really teaches, no cap. The most dangerous person in any room isn't always the loudest one. Duck Young had power, money, and a reputation built on intimidation, and he still lost everything to people he trusted, while the woman he dismissed as invisible had been quietly outmaneuvering them all for 3 years. There's a reason intelligence communities call it the long game. Patience, preparation, and the willingness to be underestimated, that combination hits different every single time. Pride told Duck Young he was untouchable. Phyllis let him believe it, and that made all the difference. Look, if this story got you, if Phyllis's long game gave you chills or Duck Young's fall hit different, then you already know what to do. Like this video, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and drop in the comments. Who did you underestimate that came back and changed everything? Because something tells me you'll have some stories too.